Deforestation, yeah, it's time for hemp. Whoa, an acre of hemp makes 20 barrels of oil. No need for pesticides to poison all our soil. People got no food, they got no clothes, they got no rest. Well, right now it's time for hemp.
Thank you for taking Time for Hemp. I'm your host, Casper Leitch. You are listening to Time for Hemp all around the world on Tumblr, SoundCloud, iTunes, and, of course, iHeartRadio. We are no longer just a one-hour show, but we are a group of people who are working diligently to end prohibition all around the world, and I would encourage you to share us with your friends. It is Monday, and on Monday we like to put a spotlight on what marijuana can do for the body, the mind, the soul, and the spirit. And when we do that, we bring on Lynn, Mathre, and Byrne as our joint host here on the big broadcast. And they bring with them one of their joint friends for you to enjoy and learn from here on the big joint broadcast. With that said, let me pass this joint chat over to my joint friends here at Time for Hemp.
Thank you, Casper. This is Byrne with Mary Lynn, and we're here representing our nonprofit Patients Out of Time. It's a Virginia corporation. It's been around for over 20 years now, and the mission has been and continues to be the education of the U.S. public and medical professionals especially about the endocannabinoid system and the various therapeutic applications of cannabis. Cannabis is a plant. It is not a drug. Drugs, helpful medical drugs, can be made from this medicinal herb. But keep in mind, when people are talking to you or you're talking to them, you're talking about a plant, a really pretty plant. Your doctors and nurses and social workers and pharmacists can be educated about this herbal plant in an accredited fashion. That means they can get their continuing medical education credits, which most need to keep their licenses current in their states, online. They can get that education at themedicalcannabisinstitute.org. themedicalcannabisinstitute.org. For a small fee, a reasonable fee, these professionals can go online at their leisure and take courses on, as I said, about the endocannabinoid system and all kinds of areas about the medical cannabis uses therapeutically. These are accredited courses by under the accreditation of the University of California's School of Medicine in San Francisco. And we encourage them to do that. You can also find information at medicalcannabis.com and patientsoutofTime.org of a continuing educational series of conferences, again, accredited conferences. Folks that go there and want these credits can get them. We're going to have number 10 in the series here next April, likely in Baltimore, Maryland. So we'll keep you attuned to that. And at these conferences, what we do really is we promote or present scientists, clinicians, and patients who have great experience with cannabis in some format or other. One of the folks that we've had, I guess, at least twice, if not three times or more, at our more recent conferences has been today's guest. He is Dr. Greg Gerdeman, who works as a professor, a teacher, and a researcher out of Eckerd College in, where's that, St. Petersburg, Greg? Welcome,
Yeah,
Greg.
That's right, St. Petersburg. Thanks for having me.
Welcome. Oh, you're very welcome. And you know, I as we always do here, and you've been through this process before with this, a little bit of background would be great on you. I know you're a family man and you're a Florida guy, and Mary Lynn and I, being recently relocating to Florida permanently, are very much more interested in Florida. And at some point, I'd like to touch on the Florida laws and how you grow cannabis in this proposal that Florida has. Sure. But I might start out just acquainting people that Dr. Gerdeman here is kind of famous, really, because when Time Magazine now goes to talk to somebody, they go to Dr. Greg here. So anyway, Greg, give the folks an idea of what you do, please.
Sure. And yeah, again, thanks for having me. I mean, so as you know, I graduated. I got my PhD in 2001 from Vanderbilt University, and have been studying the endocannabinoid system, since about 1995, when I was starting graduate school. I came into it really from being a neuroscientist who studies learning and memory, and a real cellular and molecular sort of neuroscience. What does learning and memory look like, and how do brain cells readjust and rearrange their connections to one another? So it's relevant both for memory but also recovery from damage or resilience in the face of excitatory damage, and was pretty much in the right place at the right time, and had some good questions to be kind of on the forefront of discovering what these endocannabinoids do at synapses in the brain. So, it's fair to say I was one of the first people to publish observations about the physiology of what anandamide and other endocannabinoids are doing in brain cells. That work was very much in the area of drug abuse. I was funded by the National Institute on Drug Abuse for several years there at Vanderbilt and at the University of Arizona. And without going into a lot of detail there, so I come from a real basic science background of how endocannabinoids work. Folks who might be interested in that, I wrote a chapter in the Pot Book, a book edited by Julie Holland that came out a few years ago. I still think it's a really great book that folks can find. It's at Park Street Press, but you can find it by the Pot Book. And, well, cutting to the present day, it's been about 7 years now that I took up a faculty position at Eckerd College, and I'm still, I'm now much more of an undergraduate teacher than I am a researcher. I have an active lab looking at the evolutionary biology of cannabinoid receptors and how and why this system that responds to THC and cannabis became what it is today, which is the most widely expressed neurotransmitter system in the human brain. There's an intro.
Well, not only where when you said that, the thing that I thought of immediately, did it start with humans? If there's an endocannabinoid system, as I understand it, the endocannabinoid system exists in all living creatures with the exception of insects. So if we have one and you're studying, go ahead.
Well, I get very fascinated by it because this is my real directions now. And there's a lot of conflicting sort of, information out there. Part of it is, what do we call an endocannabinoid system? The receptors that respond to THC are called cannabinoid receptors because they were discovered out of this multi-decade quest to figure out how THC was working. And then because we have these receptors, these lipid molecules, anandamide and 2-AG, were discovered and called endogenous cannabinoids or endocannabinoids. And so now we see this endocannabinoid system, the molecules that activate the receptors, how the receptors work, whether or not they're being activated by THC as well. And so then people, wanted to ask, where did this come from, right? Did it start with humans? And started looking in different organisms. Well, there's multiple ways to look. You can use biochemistry and sort of chemical analysis to say, where are these chemicals like anandamide? And the answer there is they're all over the animal domain. I don't really say kingdom anymore. All of animals, for the most part, have these what we call the endocannabinoid messengers, including insects, but they're doing other things. What I've come to be very, very interested in is what about these things we call the CB1 and CB2 cannabinoid receptors, which people listening to this show will probably be very well aware of because there's been so much great science education about this. But the answer there is not so distant. That is, scientists have been sequencing the genes of all kinds of living organisms. It's much cheaper than it used to be. And so you can look at the DNA sequence that encodes the cannabinoid receptor and in the human or the mouse or the rat and compare it to the genome sequences of other animals like flies or sea urchins or sea squirts and many others. And when folks have done that, the surprising thing is that there's no DNA sequence in invertebrate animals that's close enough to say it's a cannabinoid receptor, with the exception of a small group, a particular group of invertebrates right at the sort of base of the vertebrate family tree. And I'm talking primarily here about animals called sea squirts and lancelets. And that's what I've started studying at Eckerd College. So this may get a little specific, but basically before you had fishes, you had an invertebrate family of animals that looked something like fishes, and that's where we all arose from evolutionarily, and that's where the cannabinoid receptor gene first appeared evolutionarily. What we call cannabinoid receptors are not present in invertebrates. They emerged in the last common ancestors of vertebrates, and I am looking into some of those distant cousins of ours to find out what they're doing there and what it could teach us about cannabinoid system in us. Does that help to clarify it at all?
Yeah, well, that's yeah, and boy, I mean, it sounds to me like you're cutting edge on that, Greg. I mean, you're kind of a visionary here, looking backwards in time to find out where we're going, right?
Well, there was, some people had some early insight looking into this. My colleagues Maurice Elphick in London, John McPartland working at a time with Vincenzo Di Marzo and Isabel Matias. These are researchers that have looked into this some years ago, but the question has kind of been sitting on the vine, in part because the big funding is for rodent models of cancer or epilepsy or, of course, drug abuse. And there's a whole lot of people looking to see how THC is addictive and dangerous. And I don't compete for those dollars anymore at a liberal arts college, but I'm at a coastal college with a great marine science program, and we study little invertebrates. It fits perfectly. And I do think, thanks for the compliment, I think there's really interesting stuff going on. And part of what we're starting to find, and it's preliminary to state this too emphatically, it's not published or anything, but we're looking at using tools to find these cannabinoid receptors in sea squirts. And these are curious animals. They start off life as kind of a tadpole that looks something like a frog or a vertebrate tadpole in the microscopic stage, call it the larval stage of the sea squirt. And they swim and find a place to anchor down, and then they go through this radical metamorphosis and turn into this sponge-like creature that just filters water and eats and reproduces. It's basically just a big tube. And so that's not that interesting to people, but we're looking at where the cannabinoid receptors are expressed in that larvae as it goes through this remarkable metamorphosis. And my hypothesis is that the endocannabinoids there are involved in the sort of major tissue organization that goes on, reorganization, the tissue remodeling that goes on during metamorphosis to yield the adult animal. And while that may seem very specialty and sort of basic biology, and it might lead us to understand kind of a real interesting question about cannabis and the endocannabinoids, which is, how is it that these compounds like THC help to promote the health and well-being of some cells, like brain cells, and at the same time selectively target cancer cells and tell them to commit suicide? This isn't a very trivial question. Like, why is that a molecule that could be protective to the cells you want be damaging to the cells that you don't? And I think the metamorphosis model, where an animal is like destroying much of its previous body in order to nurture the cell types that are going to grow into the adult, maybe we'll find some basic clues there. I mean, that's what's motivating me right now with that line of research.
Well, one of the things that motivates
Well, it's a great question.
Is paying our bills.
It's a great, I know it's an ad. Yeah, that's what motivates you. Is time to break. Yes, we're going to break right now. We'll be back in just a few minutes, folks, with Dr. Greg Gerdeman.
You are listening to the Time for Hemp Global Broadcasting Network. Please share us with your friends.
THCF Medical Clinics are the premier physicians clinic in the United States. THCF has offices all across the United States from Hawaii to Michigan. THCF Medical Clinics has helped approximately 150,000 patients obtain their medical marijuana permits to legally possess, grow, and use medical marijuana. If you have chronic pain, multiple sclerosis, or any other neurological degenerative disease, or if you have any gastrointestinal disorders such as GERD, irritable bowel syndrome, or if you have AIDS, cancer, spastic disorders, seizure disorders, or glaucoma, call us at 1-800-723-0188 or visit us online at hemp.org. Again, the number is 1-800-723-0188 and the site is hemp.org.
It's written right here, it's absolutely clear that ganja herb is the healing of the nation. So don't have no fear, and always be here. It will be here for enough generation. Yeah, they want you to feel tipsy-turvy. Tipsy-turvy. Puppy dog, come kissing on your face. They don't want to smoke the sweet lemon collie. You know, they get the smile upon the children's face. You pick him up, you lick him down, and off and try to run him down. The ganja man coming right back. A piece of musty calling bone, you chop it down, you burn it down. The ganja plant coming right back. Using the science laboratory resource. So many illness, they call it herb cure. So why don't you give I and I the permit? Oh, yeah. So why and I can go on and run. Rain come falling, make the ganja grow, and the sun come shine, and the breeze the pollen blow. You pick him up, you lick him down, and off it like to run him down. The ganja man come right back. Using your sense, laughter resource. So many illness, they call it herb cure. bun, the sweet lemon curry. Oh my love, keep the smile upon the children's face. Oh, you pick him up, you lick him down, you up and try to run him down. The ganja man coming right back. And this a must be holy boy, you pick him up, you run him down. The ganja man coming right back. And when the rain come falling, make ganja grow. Yeah. And when the sun comes shining, the breeze the pollen blow. You pick him up, you lick him down, up and try to run him down. The ganja man coming right back. This a must be holy boy. Whoa, 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 yeah. Ganja man coming right back. You pick him up, you lick him down, you up and try to run him down.
You are listening to Time for Hemp all around the world on Tumblr, SoundCloud, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Google+. We're on YouTube now. We got a Roku TV network up and running. We are letting the whole world know as loud as we can how important it is to end prohibition. With that said, I'm passing this joint chat back to my joint host here on the Big Joint broadcast at Time for Hemp.
Thank you, Casper. This is Al Byrne back with Marilyn Mathre and Dr. Greg Gerdeman from Eckerd College, St. Petersburg. And when we left the conversation, Greg, we were talking about your work with sea squirts and slugs.
Tunicates.
I can think of things that I'd rather. But anyway, I'll leave that part alone. The thing that interests me is. Again, folks, Dr. Gerdeman was interviewed in Time magazine once or twice, and so is a lady, I forget her name, Greg, up there at the University of Pennsylvania or someplace that's doing some experiments on brains of mice. And right. I interviewed with Mary Lynn a few weeks ago at Dr. Casper that wrote a book called Stoned, what a terrible name, and we told him that, and he knew it. And her data was, well, he mentioned it, and he gave the impression to me, really, in his book, that because of her work, we should all worry about using cannabis because it negatively affects our brains, which is not what I've been hearing at these conferences where I've been attending, and running for years. Could you comment on all that? There's a lot of conversation about when you get high, you're going to be violent, all of that. If you could cover that whole range of issue for us, I'd really appreciate it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is a big, wide range, and it stems from just that as new technologies have been developed, invented over the last 20 years, we've had tremendous technological advances, both in functional brain imaging in my realm of neuroscience, and in genetics and the sophistication of sequencing genes, that I mentioned before, and looking at how DNA is modified with experience. And I guess one way to introduce talking about that broad topic, knowing that we'll have to sort of paint a broad stroke, is that these technological advances have been squeezed into really what I talk about as a pernicious bias against the cannabis plant in biomedical research, that the biases and the funding structure have for so long been evident from the very beginning of plotting hypotheses that one is searching for damage. And in those two realms, brain imaging and genetics, there have been some interesting findings come out. One set with the brain imaging is notions that with casual marijuana use, you're changing the size of certain brain areas. There's been some evidence presented for that, which hits the news like wildfire, as you know. And the other is some new genetic tools, referring to, for example, what we call epigenetic modification, how experience can change the way DNA not necessarily the coding of the DNA, but how the DNA is like packaged in a way that changes the expression of genes and therefore, the function of the brain and the behavior. And that's where the Dr. Yasmin Hurd, I think you're referring to at Mount Sinai, has some interesting data. Dr. Hurd's work, and she was profiled in that same Time magazine piece I was in by Bruce Barcott, a journalist who has a book out called Weed the People. Dr. Hurd's work has shown, in a nutshell, I'm simplifying it, but she exposed mice to levels of THC and basically has been showing that in subsequent generations of mice that were injected with THC repeatedly, that in the offspring and even sort of the grandchild offspring, 2 generations from the animals that were repeatedly exposed to THC, that there were alterations in the way DNA was packaged, and behaviorally that these animals were more likely to self-administer opiates. I think that it is a very, interesting concept, and the notion that THC could really influence who you are, I think is not something that should be terribly alarming. But there's so many issues with the models of when animals do and don't self-administer drugs that it certainly should be very preliminary before using it to advance a lot of, certainly before it starts really influencing huge discourse, I think. But that said, that's an incomplete treatment of her work, which intellectually is really pretty interesting. I'm much more familiar with brain imaging work, and in fact, I was actually interviewed in USA Today a year or so ago to comment on one of these first of these scare tactic papers that came out. It was a collaboration between professors at one of the Harvard-affiliated hospitals and the Northwestern University School of Medicine, where they said, casual pot smokers have these scary changes in the size of their brain. And that story has been cited so much. It's just gone like wildfire. And what offends me the most is research luminaries like Nora Volkov and people at National Institute on Drug Abuse and Health and Human Services hold this study up like, hey, even casual marijuana use could damage your brain. And they showed nothing of the sort. Nothing. They used really sophisticated brain imaging, like I said, these new advances that allow you to sort of trace the area of really fine areas in the brain that actually aren't that obviously distinguished from their neighbors, and say, well, here's where this brain area is, and in these folks who were recreational pot smokers, they're a little bit smaller. These studies haven't held up to replication. They've been replicated like twice and better controlled, because this initial study, one of the senior authors was a fellow named Hans Breiter, who's actually somebody I've studied under, had a shared scotch with. And he didn't control for things like alcohol use. And none of these subjects who were like intelligent, well-adjusted college students, none of them had functional deficits, but apparently they had these changes in brain size in these areas of some questionable importance. And the whole thing gets filtered through a preconceived concept of damage. And that's what I think maybe we were talking about a little bit in the break.
Exactly. That's right. You were saying I'm interrupting you. You were saying the right thing. And I was just thinking, I'm going back in time with, this is your brain on cannabis when they just, frying an egg in a frying pan. And I remember the back in the 70s or early 80s or whatever it was, the government had some little dwarf cartoon character, and I was supposed to grow female breasts. This is just a continuation of the same. But they always want to express these even as you say, these very small maybe questionable differences as a negative. And,
Exactly.
I mean, why wouldn't they be a positive? I mean, why wouldn't
especially when the people experiencing the use of cannabis over time feel it's been a positive in their life?
That's my point too. Exactly. I mean, why wouldn't neuroscience see this kind of thing as a good thing? Why do they see it as a bad thing?
Researcher bias.
Well, it's built on the lens of all this previous literature in rodents primarily, where they have it as a drug abuse model. And in the drug abuse model, there's these changes in the brain that maybe they're seeing some reflection of. Now, that one paper I mentioned that was published in the Journal of Neuroscience has not been replicated successfully at all and really had questionable statistics. I think it was just flat out wrong. It should have never passed peer review. But nonetheless, some other studies have found that, for example, here's an interesting example. There was a study, I think, published out of the University of Texas that showed some differences in gray matter size in individuals who had smoked a long time. And this is heavy smoking now. These are young people who started in their young teenage years and are really heavy consumers. But they showed that there was these changes, sort of smaller sizes in certain cortical brain areas, but a larger intensity of the white matter, the fiber tracts that connect the brain areas. And you look at different media coverage of the same story, and it just shows all of our biases coming out, because some people are like, oh, look, brain damage because of smaller brain areas, and other sources are inclined to say, but look, connectivity is increased. And both may be true. I mean, some of the brain areas that are showing, changes in sizes, if it's a study, there have been exciting studies over the last years looking at changes in gray matter in the brain with meditation, for example. And at least one of those studies that came out of the one of Harvard hospitals showed reduced volume in the amygdala in individuals who went through this regimen of mindfulness-based meditation training. That qualitatively is the same thing that Dr. Breiter's group reported as being a damage effect of cannabis. I mean, literally this overlapping sort of thing. Reduced volume in like the left amygdala was reported in both cases. If it's a mind frame of a meditation study, that's a good thing. And the amygdala is involved in perceiving and responding to fear. Studying the amygdala is relevant for studying post-traumatic stress and so forth, which I know is important to you. But in a cannabis study, it's like, oh, it's damaged, and therefore you got brain damage. It's completely taken in the context of a pernicious bias against the plant, instead of having a more open discussion of all the possibilities, which would demand that we look at, like Mary Lynn said, that we look at the human population and say, how does it affect you?
Yeah. I mean, I just thought that was your... I'm not knocking you here, Greg. I'm just saying, I just thought science was more inquisitive, I guess.
Some are, but some, again, it's kind of like that. Remember who's paying for the study to get done. So.
We're always, I mean,
look, we're going to take another break here. We're going to take another break here in a couple of minutes, but on this very issue, you're not alone in this. I mean, we know the folks that you've referenced, Dr. Guzman and these kind of folks, but is this being taken seriously by neuroscience researchers at all, anywhere, besides the grand group that we know?
Is what being taken seriously?
This whole area that you're exploring. Yeah, this whole area you're exploring about a positive effect on the neural system. Sure.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I've been in this sort of realm of research since, not the very discovery of the endocannabinoids, but right about the time. I mean, when I started, I could follow every cannabinoid paper that was published. And now I can't even scratch the surface. I mean, there's hundreds of cannabinoid papers a week, in the global science literature, because it's such an explosion. I can count on one hand the people who think that prohibition makes any sense at all. Scientists realize that there's great therapeutic value, even within pharmaceuticals. They realize that. But I can also count on
hundreds of papers. Is that right? We got to go again. Again, this is an international audience, Craig, and I'd just like you to say that again. That in your opinion, there are now hundreds of papers a week internationally produced on this subject, right?
Well, I think on the broad topic of cannabinoids, I think that's a fair thing to say. There are certainly weeks in which there are. You can look at PubMed or something and find that it's a very explosive growth in this field.
Yeah,
Right. Well, we agree with you completely. I just wanted to hear it again and bring it up again because, of course, the United States government says, folks that are listening to me internationally, that this research that we're discussing here in the general sense does not exist. It just,
Well, and then they also like to say no clinical trials in the U.S., but then they don't allow them. So
then they don't allow them. So, what we have to say before we take this immediate break is when you're listening to the federal government and the federal government is talking about medical use of cannabis, consider the source. We'll be back in a few minutes with Dr. Gerdeman.
Listening to the Time for Hemp Global Broadcasting Network. The only broadcasting network dedicated to ending the global war on drugs on iHeartRadio.
Your source for quality cannabis and sativa seeds. Serious Seeds are the creators of legendary strains like AK-47, Bubblegum, Chronic, Cali Mist, and White Russian. The AK-47 is probably the most awarded strain on the planet. The high THC content of AK-47 makes it the perfect medical strain for patients seeking quick pain relief. Cali Mist is an almost pure sativa. Female medical cannabis patients have reported that this strain helps relieve menstrual cramps. Serious Seeds just acquired another Dutch high-quality seed bank, Magus Genetics. From now on, Serious Seeds can offer you even more award-winning strains. The fine folks at Serious Seeds strive to breed the best cannabis genetics that they can find, so patients can rely on the effectiveness of their medicine. Go to SeriousSeeds.com to grow your medicine. That site again is SeriousSeeds.com.
Well, now, chocolate cake makes my poor stomach ache, and all those pills are too much for me to take. I don't like cocaine 'cause it makes me all uptight, but coffee and reefer makes me feel alright. Crystal meth will make you high, and it's cheap.
You are listening to Time for Hemp all around the world on Tumblr, SoundCloud, iTunes, iHeartRadio. We are the only 24-hour a day, 7-day a week, all cannabis, all broadcasting network on iHeartRadio. And like a good joint, we are best when shared with friends. With that said, we are focusing today on what medical cannabis can do for you and your brain and your soul and your spirit and your body just by consuming it in all the wonderful ways that science and your doctors encourage you to consume. And with that said, I pass this on to my joint host, and right now, at Time for Hemp.
Thank you again, Casper. Greg, we're here again, Al Byrne and Mary Lynn Mathre with Dr. Greg Gerdeman, and we're all Florida residents. Dr. Gerdeman lives in South Florida, Mary Lynn and I up in the Panhandle area. But we're all concerned about the laws that have been the law that's been passed in Florida, which is a CBD oil only law, which just doesn't make any sense to anybody. Then there's this problem of picking and choosing who's going to be able to grow medical cannabis, pretty much restricted to a few buddies of the governor, apparently, and maybe a few other people that are a bit higher class, is certainly the money folks of the corporate folks on there. And then there's there's an attorney named John Morgan who has a petition going, apparently quite successfully, to bring medical cannabis onto the docket of Florida's laws. There's Greg, you're there. You've been a consultant to a lot of these people. Can you? We talk about Florida a lot here, but Florida's important.
You get the current state of affairs.
Yeah, can you give us the folks? Remember, these folks are around the world, so the legal system somehow baffles them all. But could you give them an idea of what is at play in Florida this year down there?
Yeah, well, a lot is. And when my wife and I moved here 7 years ago, I mean, I admit I thought Florida would be one of the very last places that would be liberalizing cannabis policy. And now I have hope that things are finally changing. There, like you mentioned, there is a law that was passed in spring of 2014 that was a CBD only, sort of so-called low THC cannabis law that allows for very limited production. 5 different producers, one per of the so-called 5 regions in Florida, can grow and process into the oils, make the extractions, make the oils, and run dispensaries. It has to be what we call vertically integrated, where the whole one company does everything from seed to sale. And in full disclosure, I'm involved with one of those companies in the southwest region of Florida, and we hope to get a license to produce low THC cannabis because there is great medicinal value and promise in cannabidiol. I mean, I'm a big believer in expanding much looser constraints on whole plant cannabis, and there's a real wave of sort of myth that cannabidiol is the medical part of cannabis as opposed to THC, for which we have much better research and understanding. THC is definitely medicine. High THC cannabis is definitely medicine. It's absurd to say otherwise, really. Granted, there's no currently accepted in the eyes of the FDA medical use, but that doesn't mean it's not currently accepted as medical use. I won't go down that whole wormhole, but right now we do have that law, and yet some 17 months or so after it was passed, the Department of Health has yet to award licenses, so we're waiting to see if people will be able to grow that and get it to people who could use it. In the meantime, there are 3 different petitions going around to get on the ballot for a constitutional amendment next year. That's the only way in Florida you can have a ballot proposition is to amend the Constitution. It takes 60% of the vote, which is why last year's medical marijuana amendment was defeated, though it got 58+% of the voting vote. But there's a ballot again. United for Care that you mentioned, John Morgan's group is pushing to get medical marijuana legalized in the Constitution for a set of indications. There's one called Regulate Florida that is a ballot that would essentially allow sale of cannabis products and tax and regulate it, something like alcohol as a model. And then there's another one called Floridians for Freedom that was started largely by some of our friends in Florida Cannabis Action Network that is very bare bones, and it just says essentially citizens of Florida should have the right to possess and cultivate cannabis, and state it would put on the legislature to regulate it, but it would create that constitutional right. I hope all these 3 things get enough signatures to get on the ballot so that folks will be able to consider ways that we can get more progressive with that. And hopefully the legislature in Tallahassee will feel that amazing public pressure and actually try to take some ownership of it and pass something more open in the spring that would at least allow a medical cannabis law that has THC in the product. But we'll see. The legislature has proven itself to be just. It's hard to believe how they have dropped the ball on taking any responsibility for what the citizens want and what patients need. That's kind of my state of affairs on it. We're just waiting.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Mary Lynn would agree that all three of those bills are I don't know, they're better than
amendments.
Yeah, they're better than nothing. But of course, they're not what you or I think, or any other knowledgeable person on this issue would think would be a good idea. I mean, we have the ability in this country, folks, to make 200 gallons of wine or alcohol drinks a year for our own personal use for every adult. So that means Marilyn and I could have 400 gallons of wine here, and we do make our own wine, and it would be perfectly legal. That's a lot of bottles of wine for me to consume in the course of a year with my wife. The idea that I can't have a significant amount of cannabis herb, like I have basil, I have oregano, I actually have things growing here on my property that will kill me. Hemlock and things like this will kill me dead real quick. And I don't understand the whole avoidance of the plant issue, but I also don't understand the avoidance of the comments that Dr. Gerdeman is saying. This is not an unknown discussion we're having, and yet it seems that even with almost 60% of the vote, the last time in Florida, where the Floridians were dealt with a overwhelming amount of garbage information on the newspapers did pretty good, but the TV ads and stuff were outrageous. And still,
the next date rape drug.
Oh, it was awful down there, folks. The stuff they said. I mean, it was all slanderous. So, are we seeing that yet, Greg, down there in Florida? Are they already banging back with some nonsense again?
No, I don't think any of that's going to happen until something actually gets on the ballot and it moves forward. And then, I mean, as you know, the vast majority of the money that was funneled into those oppositional ads came from the Las Vegas casino billionaire Sheldon Adelson. He pumped in so many millions right near those, and it really came in the last 3 or 4 months where those ads just got intolerable. And do I expect it'll happen again? I don't know what all the strategies will be. And there are people who say, well, having 3 ballot petitions will hurt the chances for any of them passing. I don't really buy that, but I do suspect that being that the opposition is so centralized from big money casino out-of-state individuals, they probably may just focus on it's all bad, say no to the evil weed, and we'll see what happens. But the legislature's inept ability to do anything, to move forward, even on this low THC, it's basically no THC cannabis. It's a glorified, what we're ostensibly going to be able to grow in these 5 different growers, again, which I hope to be part of, it's essentially a glorified small hemp plant that is being used as an extract for medicine and with the highest overhead ever. I mean, the amount of money that these companies, the investors, are having to shell out just to apply for a license is extraordinary, and then it's taking forever for the DOH to even make a decision about it. It's a mess.
Well, let's face it. I'm glad you're in it. I'm glad you're in it because we need people of quality to be there. But at the same time, the process that's been designed, I just think is ludicrous. It's ridiculous. Now, I do like the vertical integration. I would champion that all the way, to have a chain of custody, if you will, from seed all the way through your product that the patient takes, whether that be an ointment or inhale somehow or some sort of tincture or lotion. That's the only way to go. It has to be accountable that way, and you can't have anybody. But short of that, there's got to be more competition. This is America. I'm not sure that just 5 people in Florida are qualified to grow this stuff, and I'm not sure that the 5 that'll be selected have ever grown any in their lives, which is troublesome.
Well, I can tell you,
and
Al,
it just does seem to me.
You know, the state of affairs with this current legislation, this current ruling, is that it's only really open to people who've operated nurseries in Florida for 30 continuous years. And the group that I'm involved with...
30 years ago, if you were a black man or a black woman, you couldn't get a nurseryman's license. So we're already back to Florida Jim Crow.
The group that I'm involved with is the only applicant in the state that has been producing food. I mean, the farm has been producing organic, and it's committed to organic, low water usage, low carbon footprint. I'm really excited about it. But they've got food safety audits, you know. So that's critical for the medicine. And every other applicant in the state is basically grown ornamental, you know, palm trees and bromeliads and orchids, and they've got no experience with food safety when it comes to pesticides and scaled up production. So, I mean, they may have gardens, you know, but that's so very important, and the pesticide usage is so important an issue right now with cannabis being scaled up, as we're seeing in Colorado and Oregon and elsewhere. I mean, people, sure, there are really great cannabis growers out there who have learned how to grow and nurture these products in small little grow rooms that they're the only ones that ever go into. But when they expand up to 10,000 plants, they get caught off guard by the molds and the other pests, and end up having to pump in poison because they can't bear to get rid of that expensive a crop. And I think Florida people, when they start growing down here and they don't have clean organic produce experience, and they see how much mildew is in the air in humid subtropical Florida, pesticides are going to be a real issue. So I hope that the DOH comes down in favor of those of us, our groups, who have a real understanding of how to grow organically and in food safe quality. There's my little pitch without even naming.
I agree.
My group.
But that's very important. When you're going to be growing stuff to give to patients, quality control is hugely important.
Oh, God, it's all it can be. Greg, we got to go. Thank you so much for giving us your time and your expertise and your thoughts. It was enlightening as always. You're a great guest, and you're a great teacher, so thank you again.
Thank you guys for having me, and thanks for being forces, for education, both here with Time for Hemp and Patients Out of Time, because when we talk about this being not a new subject, right? It's a medicine, as Don Abrams says, it's been used it's been a medicine for far, far longer than it's not been a medicine. And we know the human safety of it. We really do. I mean, it's not like there isn't some problems, but we know how safe it is compared to experimental, brand new pharmaceuticals that are unknown entities. And education is key. It's just key for patients, for families, for physicians, and we got to keep that up.
Well, I just think we had a really good hour of education. Thank you again, Doctor.
Great. Thank you, guys.
All right, guys, this is Al Byrne and Marilyn Mathre, and we're representing Patients Out of Time, and we're going to go. Check us out at medicalcannabis.com, and you can find us back here next week at the same time, same place, with another medical cannabis expert like Dr. Greg Gerdeman. Until then, this is Al Byrne for Patients Out of Time. Take care.
And don't forget, we have a large archive on our website. All of our hosts, all of their programs have been archived. So if you've got a show that you enjoy, you might check out some of their past programming. I'm sure you'll find them to be just as informative and interesting. We also do a lot of music on the network. We are found all around the world. And please share us with your friends. And remember, the next time you hear me, you'll know that it's time for hemp.
Look at all that money, yeah, the money that they spend. Take another look and spend some time for him. Don't cut trees for paper.
Free? Did you say free? Free hemp? Free hemp? Free hemp video and audio? Free downloads of all the top artists, all the pot artists on planet Earth. Interviews with all the people making the movement, making the hemp movement. It's time for hemp. That's right, world. It's time for hemp. That's right, world. It's time for hemp.